My sister literally ran out of her own wedding mid-ceremony, and now our families are at war. It was absolute chaos. I'm her maid of honor and younger sister, and I'm still shaken and not sure what to do to help. So I'm here to spill the tea, or maybe just to scream into the void. Let's start with the basics. My sister, Alice, 29F, was supposed to marry Mark, 30M, yesterday. Instead, she ended up sprinting down the street in her wedding gown, crying her eyes out, with me running after her. All while back at the church, our mom and a strange dad were having a screaming match, and the groom's family looked ready to kill someone. How did we get here? Buckle up. Family background. Our parents are divorced, and not the amicable kind. Think Hatfields and McCoys, but with more passive aggression and decades of resentment. Our dad, I'll call him John, 60M, cheated on our mom, Linda, 58F, about 15 years ago, and then basically pieced out of our lives. He moved to another state with his new family and only made sporadic attempts to contact us after. It broke my sister's heart, and Mom absolutely hates his guts. We both cut contact with him by our late teens after he missed a few too many birthdays and life events. Suffice it to say, Mom raised us on her own, and Dad has been persona non grata ever since. Wedding planning woes. Fast forward to wedding planning. Alice was usually a pretty chill person, but the stress turned her into a bundle of nerves. Honestly, I wouldn't call her a full-on bridezilla in the classic screaming at staff way. She didn't throw huge tantrums at vendors or anything. Well, maybe one or two minor incidents where she snapped and apologized. But she was extremely on edge about everything. And the biggest source of her anxiety was, you guessed it, the whole parent situation. She was adamant that Dad was not to know about the wedding, let alone be invited. She wanted nothing to do with him, and she especially didn't want Mom to have to deal with her cheating ex showing up. Mom and Dad in the same vicinity is just asking for disaster. So from the start, Alice made it clear. Dad was off the invite list, off the info list, just off the grid regarding this wedding. Mark, the groom, understood and said he'd support her decision. But Mark's family, they didn't fully get it. They're a big, tight-knit clan and the more the merrier about events. His parents have been married like 35 years. Super wholesome. So the concept of father not being at his daughter's wedding was kind of foreign to them. Early on, his mom, Patricia, 55F, innocently asked Alice, "Oh, will your father walk you down the aisle?" I remember seeing the color drain from my sister's face. I jumped in and said, "Our dad is not in the picture," which made Patricia immediately apologetic and awkward. She dropped it at the time, but I could tell it didn't truly register with her why he wouldn't be there. I got the vibe that she thought it was just some temporary spat or something that could be fixed because, in her world, family is family, right? A few weeks before the wedding, Mom told us she'd heard through the grapevine, small-town gossip, ugh, that Dad somehow found out about the wedding. We aren't sure how. Maybe a relative mentioned it or he saw something on social media, though my sister was careful not to post details. This made Alice even more anxious. She asked Mark to please make sure his family also knew Dad was absolutely not to be invited or given any info. He assured her he told them and that they'd respect her wishes. Spoiler, that did not happen. Rehearsal drama. At the rehearsal dinner, tension simmered under the surface. It was the first time our families really met. They live in different states. Mom was polite, but I could tell being around Mark's warm. Friendly Dad was hard for her because it reminded her of my dad, or rather, how my dad wasn't like that. Then Patricia, groom's mom, had a few glasses of wine, and I overheard her say to my mom and sister, "I just think a girl should have her father at her wedding, no matter what happened. It's a shame, really." In this sad voice, my mom went stiff as a board and gave her a look that could kill. I quickly pretended I needed Patricia's help in the kitchen to diffuse that. Later, I pulled my sister aside and said, "I have a bad feeling your future MIL might pull something." Alice looked worried and said Mark had talked to his mom already and thought she understood. But clearly Patricia still believed she was helping by pushing the dad issue. Mom was fuming over that comment. But I got her cooled down, chalking up to wine talk and reminding her it was just one more day. Then we'd never have to deal with dad stuff again. The big day, a.k.a. yesterday, a.k.a. the disaster, it actually started fairly smooth. We did the typical morning prep at the church. Alice was super nervous, but also excited. I could tell she was holding it together by a thread. There were a couple of minor hiccups. The floors delivered white lilies instead of pink roses for some arrangements. Normally my sister wouldn't care, but that morning she had a mini meltdown like, this is not what I ordered. Her eyes were wild like she might cry or break something. I and the planner quickly fixed it by swapping in some other flowers we found in the venue's fridge. Crisis averted, but it showed her mental state. Once we were dressed and ready, she actually seemed to calm for a bit. She looked absolutely beautiful in her gown, like a movie star. I think she was trying to focus on Mark and the fact that after all this stress, she'd finally be married to the love of her life. But I know her, and I could still see the tension in her smile. Ceremony was set for 2 p.m. at our family church. Mom was going to walk her down the aisle, which I thought was actually really sweet. We all agreed on that plan. I was right behind them as maid of honor. We had practiced this during the rehearsal, got a few stares from some traditionalist relatives. But whatever, it was what she wanted. Guests arrived, music playing softly. Everything seemed ready. I peeked out before walking and saw Mark at the altar looking nervous but happy. The church was packed. Mark's family on the right, our family on the left. I did notice an empty seat toward the back on our side, which was odd because I thought all our folks were there, but I was too preoccupied to think about it. Procession begins. I go down the aisle with the groomsmen, take my place. The bridesmaids and groomsmen are all up front. The music changes, bridal march begins. Everyone stands and turns. There's my sister on Mom's arm, looking a little teary-eyed, happy tears I thought, and radiant. I'm already getting emotional watching her. They get about halfway down the aisle, and I see Alice's expression suddenly change from nervous smile to a sort of deer-in-headlights panic. Her steps falter. Under her breath she mutters, "What is he doing here?" I follow her line of sight to the back of the church, and that's when I see him, our dad, standing just inside the doors at the back, in a suit, holding his hands clasped nervously. I hadn't seen him in years, and my stomach dropped. I felt my own face go pale. He must have been that empty seat I noticed. He snuck in after everyone was seated, maybe hoping not to be seen until after the ceremony or something. Mark's mom must have tipped him off and encouraged him to come. For a second, I hoped maybe Alice didn't actually see him and that we could just ignore it. No such luck. Dad took a step forward, like he was going to walk down the aisle behind her or approach her. He looked hopeful and emotional. He called out, "Alice," softly. My sister stopped in her tracks. Everyone else in the pews is confused, whispering. She lets go of Mom's arm, or maybe Mom released her, not sure, and just stares at our father. Then she lets out the strangled loud "no" and yells "get out" at him. It was like a gut punch hearing that echo in the silent church. People were stunned. A few of Mark's relatives looked at each other like, who is she yelling at? Dad looked stunned too. He raised his hands like he wanted to calm her and said, "Honey, please, I just came to Dash." Probably to see you get married or something. But he didn't finish because Mom suddenly turned and saw him. I swear I almost saw literal smoke coming out of our mother's ears. She spun around, marched back up the aisle toward my father in her elegant mother of the bride dress, and started shouting, "How dare you? You were told not to come," or something to that effect. Dad started arguing back quietly. "I had to be here. I want to be here for her." Mom was like, "You have no right." Her voice was not quiet. Every guest was basically gaping at the drama. Mark had stepped down from the altar at this point, realizing something was very wrong. He came down the aisle quickly to my sister's side and softly asked her, "Who is that? What's going on?" I don't think she'd even registered Mark there. She was just shaking like a leaf, eyes locked on the shouting match now happening between our parents in the middle of the aisle. Then Patricia, groom's mom, gets up from her seat and hurries over, saying, "Please, let's all calm down," kind of wringing her hands. I think she was trying to defuse it, but Mom turned her anger on Patricia and practically shrieked, "Did you do this?" Patricia went pale and said, "I only wanted to help." That was as good as a confession. Mom shouted, "You invited him?" And Patricia started crying, saying something like she thought my sister would regret not having her father there. Mom hollered, "This is not your family, not your decision." At this point, Mark's dad and brothers got up too, because things were clearly going off the rails. Mark's dad tried to get between my mom and dad, saying, "Let's step outside and talk." My dad then yelled, "I'm not going anywhere. I have a right to see my daughter on her wedding day." Mom snapped back, "You lost that right years ago." They were full-on screaming at each other in the aisle by now, in front of everyone. Some of the younger kids in attendance started crying from all the yelling. I saw a couple of Mark's groomsmen move to usher guests out or something, but most people just stayed, glued to the drama despite the discomfort. And my poor sister, She was standing there, trembling and sobbing quietly at this point. Mark had his arm around her, but she looked utterly devastated and mortified. This was literally her worst nightmare come true, the exact scenario she wanted so badly to avoid. I could see it in her face. Something inside her just broke. She whispered something to Mark. I wasn't close enough to hear, and he nodded, looking a mix of angry and heartbroken for her. The next thing I know, Alice turned and bolted down the side aisle of the church. She just ran, clutching her dress, tears streaming. There were gasps, and someone said, "Oh my God." Mark called out, Alice, wait." He looked like he might chase her, and I think he wanted to, but his father, who was still in the middle of the parent melee, shouted, "Mark, it's okay. Let her go for now," or something like that. Mark was torn, but he stayed, maybe thinking she'd only be gone a moment or that he needed to help manage the mayhem inside. But I, as her sister, was not about to let her run off alone. I immediately hiked up my bridesmaid dress and ran after her, telling one of the other bridesmaids, "Cover for us," as I passed. Not that there was any covering this disaster. I sprinted out a side door just in time to see my sister, in full wedding gear, running out of the church into the parking lot. She was sobbing and sort of hiccup wailing. I caught up as she stumbled on her dress. I grabbed her and she collapsed into my arms, just absolutely bawling. She was saying, I can't, and hyperventilating. I got her to a bench by the church courtyard and tried to help her breathe. My own heart was pounding out of my chest. Inside, I could still hear the muffled sounds of yelling echoing. Our church has some big glass windows. It was surreal and horrible. After a minute, Alice just kept saying, "It's ruined. My day is ruined. I can't go back in there." I rubbed her back and said, "Let's just take a minute." But she was shaking her head, eyes wild. Then she did something I truly didn't expect. She stood up suddenly, grabbed the hem of her dress, and started power walking, then running toward the street. I was like, "Alice, where are you going?" and chased after her. She had kicked off her heels and was running barefoot down the sidewalk that wraps around the church block. I had no shoes on either. I ditched my heels to run. So here we are, bride and maid of honor fleeing the scene, dress trains flying, onlookers in cars slowing down to rubberneck at us. She finally stopped about 2 blocks away, in front of a closed flower shop, ironically. She basically collapsed onto the curb, head in her hands, crying so hard I was afraid she might be sick or pass out. I sat next to her and held her while she sobbed. I was also crying by then and probably looked like a lunatic. Full glam makeup, fancy hair, kneeling on a sidewalk hugging a bride in distress. Back at the church, I imagined all hell was breaking loose. I later learned that after we left, Dad was physically escorted out by Mark's brothers and a couple of my cousins. It almost got into a fist fight, but didn't quite. The officiant was just left standing at the altar like a statue. Poor guy. Guests were utterly confused, and some started leaving once word spread that the bride had bolted. Mark apparently was in shock and kept asking where I took her, but someone, maybe one of the bridesmaids, told him to give her some space. Anyway, after maybe 15 minutes, my mom, who had stayed back to argue more or whatever, came looking for us. She drove around and found us near that flower shop. She pulled up, jumped out, and ran over. She hugged my sister tightly and kept saying, I'm so sorry, and crying. My sister just kept saying, I can't do it, I can't. So Mom said, okay, we don't have to. Let's just go home. We helped my sister into the car. I was half expecting Mark to be trailing behind or to see someone from his family follow, but nobody, aside from Mom, had come after us at that point. They were probably dealing with the fallout at the church. We left. We actually left the groom and everyone at the church and drove off. It felt so wrong, and yet, what else could we do in that moment? In the rear-view mirror, I saw a bunch of guests milling around outside the church doors, just watching us drive away. It was like a movie scene. Aftermath. So far we got home. My sister immediately went to her childhood bedroom, locked the door, and for what I can tell, cried herself to sleep. She refused to see or talk to anyone except me or Mom. Mark did come by our house later that evening, but she wouldn't see him. She was just too embarrassed and upset. I did talk to Mark outside, and he was in tears, worried about her, unsure what to do. He asked me if she was ending the marriage or just needed time. I told him honestly I didn't know, but that she loves him deeply, and this wasn't about not wanting to marry him. It was about all the trauma today. He understood, I think, but I know he's crushed and feeling a whole mix of emotions. They spoke on the phone late last night for maybe 5 minutes. I only know this because I was in her room keeping her company, and I heard her quietly talking. From what I gathered, he mostly wanted to make sure she was safe, and she just kept apologizing to him and saying, "I couldn't do it, not like that." I don't think either of them knows what comes next. It was a heartbreaking little call. Right now, the wedding is obviously postponed. Possibly canceled, I'm not sure. No new date or anything. Both families are in a mess of hurt and anger. Patricia, Mark's mom, is in deep crap with pretty much everyone. She tried to justify to Mark and others that she only did what she thought was best for the couple, that she'll never forgive herself for how it turned out, etc. My mom basically told her to stay away from us. And honestly, I don't blame her. Dad flew back home this morning after sending my sister a text that said something like he's sorry for how things went and he loves her. She deleted it without responding. She says she never wants to see or hear from him again. I can't blame her for that either. Mark is furious with his mom and with my dad, and is stuck in an awful spot between defending his bride and dealing with his own mother. My understanding is that he and his mom had a huge fight where he told her she ruined the wedding, and she was sobbing and apologizing. But apologies don't undo this. My sister, she's traumatized and depressed right now. She's mostly just sleeping or staring at the ceiling when she's awake. She keeps randomly bursting into tears and saying, "My wedding is ruined. It's all ruined." I've been at her side constantly, telling her it'll be okay, that she can still have her happily ever after, but she's not hearing it yet. She's also really guilty. She keeps saying she humiliated Mark and that maybe his family will hate her now, and that she feels like she proved our father right somehow. Not sure what she means by that. Maybe that he always played victim, and now there's a narrative she ran away from her wedding which might feed his martyr complex. I don't know what to tell her, or what to do. Part of me wants to tell her to just elope with Mark and forget everyone else. Have the wedding they both want without the drama. But another part knows she has a lot to process before she can even think about wedding plans again. As for me, I'm oscillating between rage and sadness. Rage at my father for showing up like, "Dude, you were asked not to. Have you not done enough damage?" Rage at Patricia for her meddling, no matter how well-intentioned she thought it was. Sadness of my sister and Mark, whose day was destroyed so publicly. It's a mess. I'm here writing this partly to vent, and partly hoping someone has some advice. How do I help my sister heal from this and figure out what to do? Has anyone gone through a wedding fiasco and come out the other side? Should I be encouraging her to talk to Mark and salvage things, or give her space to decide on her own? And how do we even begin to smooth things over between families? For now, I've been just sitting with her, making sure she eats a little, drinks water, etc. Mark is giving her space today, but is eager to see her. I told Mark I'd keep him updated. I truly hope they can still get married, because they do love each other so much and they make a great couple. I think if they can get past this, they'll be stronger for it. But I also worry this whole event might have scarred their relationship, or at least their ability to trust that his family will respect boundaries. Ugh, my heart is broken for them. Anyway, that's the drama I'm dealing with. I'll update if anything changes, but right now it's just a mess. Update 1. 1 week later, hi everyone. I didn't expect so many responses and messages after my original post. I read a lot of your comments to keep myself sane over the past week. Thank you for support, advice, and even the tough love some of you dished out. It's been one hell of a week, but I finally have a moment and something significant to update. It's been about a week since the wedding disaster. Things have slowly calmed down from utter chaos to just really complicated. Here's what's happened. My sister, Alice, for the first couple of days, she was pretty much holed up in her old room at Mom's house, crying or just numb. She was embarrassed, angry, devastated, name an emotion. She had it. She wouldn't talk to many people. Mark was giving her space per my suggestion, but he was really worried about her. I was staying at Mom's too, basically acting as a buffer and support for Alice 24/7. By day 3, her emotional shock started turning into more of a quiet depression and a bit of anger. She said at one point very coldly, "I will never forgive Dad or Patricia for this." I think that resolve actually gave her a bit of strength to start functioning again. She got up, took a shower, even ate a small meal, a big step, since she'd barely touched food. Mark, the groom, has been deeply upset, but trying to be respectful of Alice's needs. He texted me every day to check on her, She wasn't ready to talk to him much initially beyond that brief phone call the first night. I kept him updated generally, like, she's still very sad, but hanging in kind of updates. He told me to tell her he loves her and isn't going anywhere. He also said he completely understands why she ran and doesn't blame her at all. If anything, he blames himself for not anticipating his mom's interference, though honestly, none of us predicted she'd go that far. Midweek, I helped arrange for Mark and Alice to finally meet in person. It took gentle prodding, because she was nervous to face him, worried that he might see her differently or resent her. I assured her that wasn't the case. So, on Wednesday, 4 days after the wedding day, I set up a private meetup at our house when Mom was out. Mom is still pretty angry at Mark's mom, and by extension was a bit cool towards Mark initially, but she understands he was not at fault. Still, I figured a quiet meeting without any parents around was best. When Mark arrived, I brought him into the living room and then went to get my sister. She was shaking like it was a first date or something. She made me promise to stay nearby, so I just busied myself in the kitchen with an earshot in case I was needed. Their conversation was really emotional, lots of tears from both of them. I didn't catch every word, but here's the gist from what I heard and what they each told me after. Mark immediately hugged her and said how sorry he was that she went through all that. He kept saying, "You didn't deserve that. I'm so sorry." He also apologized for his mom over and over, saying he was horrified by what she did. Alice was sobbing and apologizing too, saying she was sorry for abandoning him at the altar and sorry that his family had to witness that scene. She said she felt like she failed him and ruined everything. He told her there's nothing to forgive, that he was more worried about her well-being than anything else. He said when she ran out, all he wanted to do was run after her, but he froze, and then got pulled in to deal with the crowd and his mom. He admitted he was frustrated in that moment because he felt torn, but that he absolutely doesn't blame her for doing what she had to do. She expressed some fears that maybe he or his family would think she was unstable or something for running. He immediately shut that down and said, "Anyone in your position would have been overwhelmed." I was overwhelmed, and it wasn't even my dad causing the scene. He even joked lightly, "If anyone is unstable, it's the people who cause this, not you." They talked about possibly rescheduling or what to do going forward. I could see both of them tense up at that topic. My sister admitted that the idea of walking back into a wedding right now gives her panic attacks. She said, "I want to be your wife, but I never want to go through that again, not in front of a crowd." Mark held her and said, "Then we won't. We don't have to do anything you don't want to." He suggested maybe a courthouse wedding or a tiny ceremony somewhere private when she's ready, or even just signing papers and having a vacation together. He basically said he doesn't care about the wedding event anymore at all. He just cares about their marriage. I peeked in at that point and saw them sitting together on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. It made me so relieved I started crying quietly in the kitchen, happy tears for once. They didn't make any firm decisions yet, but they both agreed to remain engaged and take things at her pace. So, not a breakup, thankfully. They're still very much in love, just traumatized by the wedding day. In fact, Mark kind of moved into our mom's house for a few days after that with her permission, sleeping on the couch just to be near and help take care of Alice. He and Mom had a long talk too. My mom apologized to him for leaving the way we did, though she was also like, what else could we do? He apologized to her for what Patricia did. It was a bit awkward at first, but ultimately my mom thanked him for standing by Alice. I think seeing how devoted he is to her daughter softened Mom's anger somewhat. Family feud status. Dad, Johnny flew back home and sent a couple of attempts at contact, besides a text he sent on the wedding night. He also wrote an email to my sister that basically was a weak sauce apology / self-justification. I just couldn't miss my only daughter's wedding. I want to try to make amends, etc. Alice has not responded and doesn't intend to. She asked us all to not mention him to her again for now. We did get word through a relative that Dad is apparently ashamed and sorry, but also upset that he was thrown out and not welcomed. He apparently truly thought showing up would be a feel-good surprise that might start reconciliation. Delusional much? In any case, he's out of the picture again. Good riddance. Mark's mom. Patricia, where do I even start? The woman has called and texted my sister multiple times to apologize. The first few were not well received. One voicemail she left sounded half apology, half self-pity. I was only trying to help. I never imagined it would go so wrong. I can't sleep knowing I hurt you. Please talk to me. My sister has not responded to her at all. Mark told his mom to back off and give Alice space, in no uncertain terms. He was furious with her. There's a lot of tension there. He actually went back to his parent house 2 days after moving to Mom's, specifically to confront his mother with his dad present as a sort of mediator. According to Mark, who came back afterward and relayed to us, that conversation was intense. He told her straight up that she betrayed his and Alice's trust, that she had no right to interfere, and that her actions were the primary cause of the ruined wedding. Apparently, she just bawled and kept saying she was sorry and that she thought, in time, Alice would be glad to have her father there. Mark didn't let her off easy. He said something like, well, you broke her, and she's not sure she ever wants to have a wedding at all now. Are you happy? He admitted to me he regrets that phrasing because it was harsh, but he was so angry in the moment. Patricia has been hiding out at her sister's house, Mark's aunt, since that confrontation, probably to give everyone time to cool down. She did send my mom a long apology via email as well. My mom read it aloud to me. It was basically Patricia taking full responsibility and begging for forgiveness, saying she misjudged the situation terribly, and that she realized that she was wrong and selfish to impose her idea of family on us. My mom hasn't replied yet, and frankly, she doesn't really want to. She's still too angry. Mark's dad, I'll call him Jim, has been actually great through this. He personally came over on day 2 with flowers and sat down with my mom to apologize on behalf of their family. He seemed genuinely mortified and said he did not know Patricia had invited my dad until the moment he showed up. Apparently, she hid it from him too, knowing he would have shot it down. He told my mom that he gave Patricia an earful for overstepping. Mom, still emotional, basically told him, I don't blame you or your son, but I cannot forgive your wife right now. Jim understood. He has been checking in with Mark, and even with me occasionally. He got my number from Mark, just to extend support. Honestly, he's been a class act, and it's clear where Mark gets his kind demeanor from. Extended family/friends. As expected, gossip and stories spread around town. We put out a simple announcement on social media that, due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding of Alice and Mark on date was postponed. We appreciate your understanding and privacy at this time. Most people have been respectful. A few nosy acquaintances tried to pry details. We ignored them. Those who were at the ceremony obviously know what went down, and apparently many have expressed support/sympathy to my sister and outrage at Dad/Patricia. So at least public opinion, for what that's worth, is on my sister's side. Current status of the couple. After spending a few days on the same roof, with me and Mom around, Alice and Mark decided to go back to their own place. They had been living together in an apartment they leased last year. My sister was reluctant to leave Mom's initially, but I think being home with Mark, just the two of them, is helping her feel some normalcy and safety again. They're basically having a quiet staycation, this week with phones mostly off. They both took off work. They were supposed to be on honeymoon now, after all. They haven't decided on what to do about the wedding formally. The venue and vendors have been understanding. Luckily, Mark's dad handled a lot of the cleanup with those, since we were in no state to. There's money lost, some deposits, etc. But Jim insisted on covering those costs. My mom fought him on that and lost. For now, we're all just saying the wedding is postponed indefinitely, between us and the Redditverse here. Alice has said she might be okay with a courthouse thing or elopement when she's ready, and maybe a low-key party later. Mark is fine with whatever she decides. So, they still want to get married, just not in a big traditional way anytime soon. I'm personally rooting for them to maybe do a destination elopement, just go somewhere beautiful and focus on each other. They both deserve some happiness without drama. How I'm doing. I realize I haven't talked about myself much, but a lot of you kind strangers asked if I was okay too. Thank you for that. I think I've been running on adrenaline this whole week. Try to take care of sis. It hit me a couple days ago, and I had a good cry on my own and a giant glass of wine. It's been stressful for sure, but seeing them start to heal and knowing they are together and strong has made it worth it. I told Alice I'm considering charging a maid of honor therapy fee. She actually laughed at that, which is the first time I heard her laugh in a while. Small victories. So, in summary, things are tentatively looking better. Alice and Mark are sticking together and supporting each other through this ordeal. The families, well, it'll take time, but I think eventually the fury will settle. There may be some awkward holidays ahead, and I doubt my mom and Patricia will be having tea anytime soon, but at least everyone agrees that Alice and Mark's relationship comes first right now. I'll update again when there's more to report, especially if they decide on new wedding plans or if any further drama, hopefully not, unfolds. But fingers crossed the worst is behind us. Thank you again to everyone who lent an ear and shared advice. It genuinely helped to know so many strangers cared. Update 2, 1 month later time for what will likely be the final update to this saga. Buckle in, but I promise, this time it's a good kind of drama. A lot can change in a month. It's been about a month since the would-be wedding day. After the initial fallout, see my last update for the intense immediate aftermath, things have moved forward in a surprisingly positive way. A new plan. After a couple weeks of laying low therapy, yep, my sister and even Mark did a few counseling sessions together to work through the trauma, and many long talks, Alice and Mark decided that they still wanted to get married sooner rather than later, but on their own terms. Big traditional wedding? Out the window. Instead, they opted for a super small, family-only ceremony. And I mean really small, just immediate family and 2 close friends as witnesses. They didn't even send formal invites. We all just got a group text saying, wedding redo. Backyard at Mom's house, this Saturday at 4 p.m. Casual dress. BYOB and your love. Faced with tears of joy, honestly, that text alone made me smile so much. It was so them. Yes, you read that right. We held the ceremony in our mom's backyard, under the oak tree we used to climb as kids. We strung up some fairy lights, set up a few chairs and a table with a homemade cake, baked by one of Alice's friends. And that was it. Simple, intimate, 0 pomp, 0 circumstance. And crucially, 0 room for unwanted guests or overbearing meddlers. The ceremony, it was beautiful. I might be biased, but I have to say it was even more heartfelt than the original big wedding plan could ever have been. Alice wore a lovely cream-colored sundress, nothing like her big gown, which remains in a garment bag in the closet. She decided she wanted a completely fresh start. She did, however, with a veil from her original outfit, a shorter veil. For a touch of bridal tradition, she joked that the veil deserved a proper outing. Mark ditched the tux and wore a nice navy suit with no tie. They both looked so relaxed and happy. It nearly made me cry before the ceremony even started. The most touching part. Instead of a formal procession, Alice simply walked out the back door and across the yard. But she didn't walk alone. She asked Mark's dad, Jim, if he would escort her. It was a last-minute decision she kept secret until the day. When she asked him, I witnessed this. Jim got teary-eyed and said he'd be honored. I think everyone knows he's been like the dad she wished she had. Seeing him proudly walk her across the grass, arm in arm, both of them smiling. Oh man, there was not a dry eye among us. Mom later told me that moment healed something in her, too. She saw Alice finally have a supportive father figure by her side, and it just felt right. I stood up there as her maid of honor. Round 2, let's go. Mark's best man was his brother this time. His original best friend, best man, couldn't fly back on short notice, which was fine. The officiant was actually a close family friend who got ordained online just for this. They exchanged vows that they wrote themselves. And let me tell you, there was not a hint of hesitation or lingering trauma in my sister's voice. She was clear, steady, and joyful as she promised to love Mark forever. Mark actually had to stop and wipe his eyes halfway through his vows. It was raw and genuine and absolutely perfect. When the officiant, our family friend, finally pronounced them husband and wife, the small group of us cheered loudly enough to probably be heard down the whole block. My sister grabbed Mark and gave him the happiest kiss I've ever seen. No one yelled stop or interrupted. No surprises. Well, okay, one tiny funny moment. Right after the kiss, my toddler nephew, Mark's sister's kid, started crying and everyone laughed. But that's a cute surprise we could handle. Family attendance and healing. Both moms were there. Yes, including Patricia, the Emile who nearly blew everything up. This was a point of much discussion beforehand. Initially, Alice did not want Patricia at the redo ceremony. But surprisingly, it was my sister who had a change of heart as the day approached. They had a one-on-one talk a week prior. Patricia requested to meet Alice in person to apologize yet again and express her feelings. To my surprise, Alice agreed on the condition that I be present, which I was. It was actually a very emotional conversation. Patricia was extremely remorseful-like. She showed up with puffy eyes as if she'd been crying already. She told my sister how deeply sorry she was for betraying her trust and how she had learned a hard lesson. Patricia admitted she had been wrong to impose her ideals and that she had started seeing a counselor herself to unpack why she did something so boundary-crossing. She genuinely seemed a changed woman, or at least a chastened one. My sister, being the kind soul she is, finally told her, "I understand you thought you were doing something good, but broke my heart. I need to know you will never do anything like that again." Patricia promised no, vowed that she would never interfere like that in their lives, and that from now on, she'd respect both of them as independent adults. By the end of that meeting, Alice actually gave her a hug. It was tentative, but it was real. I think in that moment, my sister decided to let go of the anger she'd been holding towards her future MIL. So, Patricia was invited to the backyard wedding. She showed up early to help set up chairs and serve lemonade. Actually, she was on her absolute best behavior, very low-key and humble. During the ceremony, I saw her quietly crying this time. I'm pretty sure they were happy tears. My mom was still keeping a slight distance, but by the end of the evening, I saw Mom and Patricia actually talking calmly over a slice of cake. That was something I never expected to see so soon. They even hugged goodbye. So, progress. Dad, our bio dad, John, of course was not there. And no, we haven't heard anything from him since his last email. I think he got the message that he needs to stay far away. Honestly, neither my sister nor I have any desire to rekindle that relationship. I will say this, as awful as his intrusion was, it ultimately led to my sister having the wedding that was true to her heart, and a closer relationship with her new in-laws, well, the ones who matter. So in a strange way, his stunt brought about some good. But no, he's not forgiven, just forgotten as much as possible. After the after the vows, we had a casual backyard reception. Basically a barbecue that Mark and some guys fired up the grill for. Burgers, hot dogs, salads, and a little cake for dessert. It was the polar opposite of the fancy catered fare that never happened last month. And yet, it was so much more relaxed and fun. There was a Bluetooth speaker playing a mix of fun tunes. At one point, we even did a silly makeshift first dance with them on the patio. My sister laughed the whole time as Mark spun her around to an Ed Sheeran song. My mom and Jim, Mark's dad, actually partnered up for a dance too, which was adorable, both of them dramatically waltzing and making us all laugh. Even I got dragged into a little line dance that the groom's sibling started. It was that kind of party, easy, unstructured, joyful. The night wound down with a small bonfire. We threw some pine cones into the fire pit and sat around chatting. Alice changed out of her dress into comfy clothes, and we all just talked and laughed under the stars. The tension of a month ago was entirely gone. It honestly felt like one big, somewhat quirky family. Before the night ended, Mark made a little toast. He raised a beer and said something like, "To family, the ones we're born into and the ones we choose. We may be a weird bunch, but I'm grateful for all of you. Thank you for helping us get our happy ending." We all clinked our glasses or soda cans and juice boxes for kids and shouted cheers. Or maybe it was about time, in my case, haha. Happily ever after, Alice and Mark are officially married now. Party popper, their husband and wife, and you can just tell how much more at peace my sister is. She told me later that evening, when we had a quiet moment, "This is exactly how it was meant to happen. I feel free." That made me tear up. They leave tomorrow for a short honeymoon road trip. Not the original European honeymoon they had planned. That got refunded mostly. But something better for them right now. A drive up the coast with no fixed plans, just the two of them, stopping at cute B&Bs, beaches, and wineries along the way. Kinda low-key and romantic. As for the family, I think we've all learned some lessons. Boundaries are important, communication is key, and sometimes smaller is better. My mom and Patricia even discussed maybe doing a joint family dinner in a few weeks when the newlyweds are back to sort of celebrate and continue healing. That blows my mind given a month ago they were ready to scratch each other's eyes out. But I'm glad. I also have to note, my sister has shown incredible strength through all this. What could have broken them apart actually brought them closer together. She says she's grateful that Mark never wavered, and Mark says he's in awe of how strong she is to have overcome everything. They're solid, those two. Unexpected yet satisfying ending. TLDR, my sister and her fiancé turned the wedding fiasco into a triumph of love. They forgave some, forgot others, and found a way to celebrate that felt right. The runaway bride became a radiant bride. The family feud turned into a tentative truce, and the chaotic twist led to a beautifully simple wedding that left everyone, most importantly the bride and groom, very happy. As her sister, I couldn't be more proud or relieved. They got their happy ending. Maybe not the one we planned originally, but sometimes the unexpected route ends up being the best after all. Thank you to everyone here who followed along and offered support. It helped more than you know. This is my final sign-off, happily, as a very proud little sister, a now married couple.